I first wrote poetry back when I was a child, as many of us have, I guess. I returned to it later on in life, about 1998. I was attending the University of Missouri, and I wrote a poem that was excellent quality, and the teachers raved about it, and realized I had a talent in that area. I then took a long hiatus while I was a high school English teacher and wrote my best or my next bit of poetry starting about, I guess it's been probably 4 or 5 years ago. I have steadily been writing poetry for about the last 3 years. The question is, in my opinion, is poetry the most beautiful way to expand universal literature? I'm not sure that I really understand the totality of the question. I think of literature as being anything that we pick up and read, anything from newspapers to, books, novels, whatever, a magazine article, because I've read quite a few and wide variety of stuff since I was a little child. Um, Anything I could get my hands on, even a cereal box. But universal literature, I guess I would think about things such as classics, I guess. And, I think that people are either drawn to those or not. I know that some of my favorites have included John Steinbeck, and I've read quite a bit of his books. Um, Universal literature meaning every other type of literature except for poetry, I guess. And you know, I'd say that either someone has an interest in that area or they don't. I really don't have much of a comment on that. I know for me, I just read everything I can get my hands on. That's the way it's always been. The next question is, which poetic styles do I prefer to write my poetry in? Any style imaginable, and I have. Uh, I've written classic styles like Petrarchan sonnets or Shakespearean sonnets. I've written haiku. I've also written styles that are very similar, just a classic four, four lines per verse poem. I read a lot of those. I don't think of styles in particularly. In other words, I don't follow a set format. Generally speaking, one of my favorite ways to rhyme is every other line. And other than that, I can't really tell you much. I've done so many wide varieties of styles that it's just whatever I happen to imagine at the moment. And I kind of like to pride myself in the fact that I don't follow styles, but actually set styles or make new styles for my poetry. The next question has to do with cite a poet from antiquity and a contemporary who inspires me the most in the construction of my poetry. In antiquity, well, I don't know if they'd consider John Donne to be antiquity. I guess he'd around the Middle Ages, right? Uh, you know, and I'd have to say, Middle Ages or what's the next the next age would be, I guess, the Renaissance age. And John Donne was a big influence. William Shakespeare, of course, without a doubt. Uh, and considering that's 400 or 500 years ago, I guess that's about as antiquity as I go. I haven't read a lot of the poets from early on, the Greeks or whatnot. Um, so I guess William Shakespeare, John Donne, trying to think of who else. I like the Romance poets a lot. I like Keats and Shelley, Lord Byron. They really kind of hit a note with me, especially Keats, I guess, out of all of them, just because I empathize with him a lot in that he had the tuberculosis and went through a lot of personal pain. Uh, Pain, I think, draws things into poetry. It's amazing. I've been through some personal experiences myself that I think have really made me a better poet, including my wife having passed from cancer, as well as my daughter committing suicide last year. It's had a tremendous influence on my poetry in that I've been able to release my emotions and at the same time benefit others. I think that that's the big purpose. If a poet has a purpose, I'd say it's to benefit others uh, going through the same identical experiences and being able to draw it out for the audience so that they can not feel perhaps so alone in their emotions and draw some similarities in the way we feel and differences for that matter. Let's see what the next question is here. Which poets from platforms and social media? Oh, I was also supposed to speak in terms of a contemporary poet. And, contemporary poets, that's a good question. I guess from contemporary standpoint, T.S. Eliot with J. Alfred Prufrock, I consider him to be a contemporary in that he has the new style. Anything that's done in a style that's not necessarily one of the old classic styles, I consider to be kind of neat. And his depth of imagination and understanding, as well as talking about topics and subjects that were perhaps taboo in a previous time, but really address the issues of the modern man who feels so lost in his overwhelming society. That's really a big push in my poetry. I have a feeling that we're kind of still in that same place, if not more, with the advent of technology and the sense that somehow we are grasping for identity in this society more than ever. So, and then let's see here. It said that they wanted me to cite a poet from antiquity and a contemporary who inspires me the most in the construction of my poetry. Okay, so I've discussed that. Which poets from platforms and social media do I usually follow their writings? Oh, well, okay, let's bring up some that I really particularly care for. I like Jay Basu. I guess I'm pronouncing that right, B-A-S-U, and really eat up a lot of his poetry. Will Fillmore, who has a political sense and talks about politics, and is a very talented poet. Some of the other poets that I really enjoy reading, and I read all the time. There are certain ones too. I think I'll pause this for just a second. I don't know if I can pause it though, so maybe I should just think on my feet here. Let me take a look here and see who else I can think of here. There are so many. I like Janice Fisher. I think she's a very strong poet with imagery, and I read her stuff all the time. And let's see who else we've got here. There are so many. A gentleman by the name of Eldon Luce has a strong voice that I identify with quite a bit. Let's see, who else do we have here? There are so many good ones. I like Barry Plamondon, I believe is his name. Let me take a look here and see who I've got on my list of members here. It's a good question because there's so many. I like William Worrigan, who I recently completed my most recent book that's coming out in a couple of weeks. It's entitled Inspirational Poetry for the Desperate Soul. And we split a book, and I'm excited about that. It's got a lot of our more exciting, dynamic poetry that hopefully influences people for the positive. That's what I'm after in a lot of my poetry. And that'll be coming out here in a couple of weeks. I like Nirbhat. He's an excellent poet, Nirbhat. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name correctly or not. He brings in a lot of very personal stuff, along with discussing his relationships with women or whatever. You know, he discusses a lot of topics. You know, I always think of the poet writing for themselves. Sometimes, of course, they're writing in a persona, but I think we're really revealing ourselves a lot in our poetry. And so he talks about a lot of the same stuff that I enjoy. Let's see here. Who else do we got on my list? I like a poet named Ayanu Balogun. Yano Balogun? I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Iyanu Balogun. I just recently reviewed his poetry book. He's an African poet, up and coming. There are so many good African poets that I think are sometimes not perhaps looked at very often, and I think he's just excellent. He has a lot of topics like nature. He's also a poet that believes in having a purpose, and that's why I enjoy reading his poetry, because he gets involved in community and speaks on topics that are important to the community. And I would put Edwin Bestman in that same category. I really admire his poetry quite a bit. He's just excellent. Edwin's from Liberia. I like a young poet. He's only 16 years old. He may be 17 now. His name is Solomon Clifford. He is just an excellent poet. These are poets that discuss problems they have within their own country or culture. Some of the problems that they're having in Liberia right now, they especially are focused on rape of young women and how it's treated within their society, and they personally get involved in protests, which I think is just excellent, and they speak on that in their poetry. I think we have a powerful voice for change as poets, and that we need to use that for the good of our society. And these are a couple that come to mind. I love Benedictio. I don't know I can't remember his last name, but everybody knows who Benedictio is. And he's an excellent poet. He's from Ghana, I believe. Is that right? No, Gambia, maybe. Yes. And he's an excellent poet. I like Odie Christ, Be Hot Praise, if anybody's familiar with him. He's also an excellent poet. He talks in terms of the children that are in the street so much in his poetry that I really enjoy that, because it opens a window to the ones that are forgotten perhaps in our society, the very poor who desperately need help, especially the children. Let's see, who else do we got here? I've named quite a few. I'm sure that's more than you can probably use. Let me just take a look here and see if there's anybody else that rings a bell here. I don't want to forget some of the more important ones. I don't know if I have or not. So many influences. I've left so many names out that I could never make a complete list, and I guess I'll just leave it at that, at the names that I've listed so far. Let's take a look at your next question here. In your opinion, does a poet need to have academic education, or is it possible to write? Oh, of course it's possible to write empirically, and I think that's such a nonsense that people think that you need to have an education to be a poet. I personally don't care too much for set styles in poetry, and so someone who just comes at it naturally and you know comes across the paper with an idea and explores that idea and rhymes or doesn't rhyme, it makes no difference to me. It's the idea, the content, the purpose behind the poetry, the power behind the pen. And you can go to school for the rest of your life and never have any power, or you can, you know, just hit the computer or hit the typewriter and take some chances and use that brain that we have that's so fantastic at expressing ourselves. And so that's what I've always done in my poetry. Yeah, I'm classically educated. You know, I have a bachelor's degree and I'm a certified high school English teacher, uh, you know, in English. But that's not what makes me a poet. What makes me a poet is the fact that I have some ideas that I'd like to have expressed, and so I do that. And you know, I've always been a bit of a songwriter too, and so it just kind of comes out naturally for me. I love music. What advice would you like to give to those who are starting in the field of poetry? Yeah, here it is. Just put it out there. There's a saying in writing, and I hold that dear. Uh, a woman told me one time that we don't uh, think to write, but we write to think. And the difference is just go ahead and put something down. Whatever is going through your brain, put it out there and allow the idea to develop. You'll find that it will. And it'll develop in some new and interesting ways that when it's stuck up in your brain may not be fathomable. I know I explore many different thought processes that I would never encounter if I just left it up in my brain. I have to put it down on paper, the basic idea, and then develop that idea throughout the poetry. That's what I've always done. It works well. And take chances. Don't be afraid. Put yourself out there. You know, we have one life to live. And so I would tell each and every person who believes that they'd like to give a try at this poetry, if you believe that you'd like to give a try at this poetry, you're probably a darn good poet to begin with. So go ahead and take a chance and put it out there. And you'll find out very quickly by reading a lot of other people's poetry and comparing it with your own, just by yourself. Take a look at it, and you'll have a real good understanding of, first of all, how well it's received, because you'll be getting likes or you won't be getting likes. You'll be getting comments, generally speaking. Even though it's mostly only positive comments on Facebook, we can certainly, at any point in time, invite someone to look at our poetry from a little bit more of a critical viewpoint. And I'd invite you to do that. Take some chances on asking people, what do you really think of it? Do you really like it? You know, do you think that it stands out from the crowd as far as poetry goes? Or do you think that I could have done better possibly? And in what ways may I have done better? Don't be afraid to take an honest appraisal through your own eyes and through someone else's eyes, and just see. And I think you'll discover that you'll grow as a poet tremendously. I know I've grown tremendously over the years. Where do I usually look for inspiration to write my poetry? Life itself. There are just so many things that we encounter in life, so many situations that need to be explored that have never been explored by other people. You know, we have millions and billions of thoughts from the time that we're born, and we go down so many different avenues every single day in our reasoning. And so, sometimes I just lay out my reasoning just like it goes on up in my brain, and I develop it a little bit more on paper. Before I know it, I've got a nice poem. And people identify a lot of times from the similarities in their line of thinking, or they think, wow, this is really neat because I've never thought of that. And that's even nicer when they do that, you know. It's of course great to identify, but it's really kind of cool when people say, I never thought about that, but that was really a cool way of putting it. And then, if I don't mind, can you recite a poem of yours for all of us now? I don't recite poetry. I can read poetry. Reciting, more or less, that reminds me of, the fact that I have it memorized somehow, and I don't memorize it in my poetry. But yeah, I'll be happy to read one of my favorite poems. And I guess, because I don't know if I can pause this thing. Oh yeah, I can. I can pause it right here. So I'll pause it, and I'll come back in just a moment when I find a poem. I'm going to give this a shot. This is a poem about the 4 young girls who died in a church bombing in September of 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama, during the heights of the civil rights protests of the time. The sad bombing that took place in their church one Sunday morning. And it's entitled, For Angels Left in Birmingham. The bricks did fly that bittersweet September morn. 4 hallowed angels flew high, away from hatred's dubious scorn. As cameras flew by shuddering, a shuddering focus was born, threatening no divine purpose on our nation torn. Tears of all were united, even in split families and friendships and all states divided, flooding the land in drought-like demand for answers in justice and taking firm stand. Today, peace reigns over this land, nearly 80 years later, as quiet blessings now stand over the town of Birmingham. Avoiding more harms until this day, angelic promise avoids any jam, and fiendish forebodings are left at bay. There remains within the town 4 guiding lights, forever shorn from innocence and youth to glorious sound. 4 beautiful and precious forever girls were lost, but then found. 4 beautiful girls became blessed angels that day, without burden of mortal ground. 4 girls ever floating and giggling and playing and smiling away any hatred and any bombs. 4 freed victims of hatred, and lest we forget, 4 lost loving girls who lost 4 dads and 4 moms. Curses did fall, but blessings did rise from outrageous rage. Now 4 blessed angels guide upward and peacefully engage, bringing their family and friends to God's promise ending on heavenly stage. All sing and dance gladly in eternal bliss without losing a beat, as they are all welcomed home with freedom to seat. And that's pretty much it. So my name is Joseph Gnatek. I am not Lars Duncan. That is my stage name, or whatever you want to call it, my pseudonym. But yeah, I'm Joseph Gnatek, so you can make sure to get this correct. And I've been just a poet for a couple of years. I've written 4 books, and they're for sale on Amazon.com. I really enjoy writing poetry a lot. It's meant a brand new career for me and a brand new life after years of teaching high school English. and a career in regular business. I'm just about 60 years old, and I just do this for the fun of it, truly. It's the most enjoyable thing that I could have imagined doing with my life. I now have a purpose. And thank you.